And for a long time, if you look through history, people struggle with what is charisma. We all recognize it. It's like the taste of water. We all recognize it, but it's very difficult to explain what it is. If you're not interesting, that's okay, right? I would examine why you feel, why someone might feel that way about themselves. What's more important is that you're interested in the other person. By delighting in that other person, it allows them to relax.
Hello Sales Nation, I am Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and on today's episode we have Marcus Oakey, and genuinely today's show gave me a lot of food for thought, because editing this show back, I saw myself and Marcus side by side on the video, and it was really interesting to me because today's show is all about charisma and how we can manipulate it, how some of it comes from within and how some of it comes from hacks and tactics and tools, which we get onto in the show. And it was very interesting to me to see the difference between Marcus, the charismatic charisma coach, on one side of my editing monitor, and then myself on the other, kind of hunched over, scribbling notes down, looking at bits of paper, adjusting volumes on the mixer which sits over here if you're watching this on YouTube. And it was very interesting to see how uncharismatic I am on video. I knew this already, and I knew it was something that I wanted to work on, but it was only with the side-by-side footage that I think it's something that's going to become a serious priority for me. So Marcus, I thank you for that, and I will probably be chasing you up for some coaching or training or something. We can make something happen on that front, I'm sure. So yeah, I genuinely bought into everything that Marcus said on the episode. I thought there was a lot of value in there, and it's something that I'm going to be listening back to myself to have a think about and to look at some of the ways I can implement some of the tactics and tools that we mentioned into my video recordings with you on the podcast. I think it's a life improvement and a skill all in its own that helps in sales. Who doesn't want to listen to, interact with, and spend time with that charismatic guy or girl? We all know them. There's always one generally in the sales force. But of course, it makes a difference in your relationships, whether you're single or whether you're trying to build a closer bond with the man or woman in your life. It's just super important, and it's integral to almost every human interaction that we have. So I feel like I've built up some tension in this intro, but the episode is totally worth it. You can find out more about Marcus over at yourcharismacoach.com. He's got a YouTube channel, which I link to in the show notes, which has loads of content. And with that all said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey Marcus, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You are more than welcome. So today we're going to talk about clearly charisma, and it's something that really intrigues me. It's something that I've not quite got my fingers wrapped around yet, and so I'm really intrigued to get a whole bunch of knowledge from you. And I want to put it in perspective because I'm my girlfriend and long-term partner. I'm going to be with her now forever, most likely. She would attest to this as well, but in certain situations, I have been charismatic. I'm a great flirt. I'm great from that perspective, especially in my young years of talking to, picking up, to use that horrible term, women, and situationally, that's never been a problem for me whatsoever. However, in the workplace, I've always been a bit of a weird, had a weird angle on this, from trying to be corporate, trying to be charismatic, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then we get to the podcast where I think I'm terribly uncharismatic in a lot of ways. And I think this is most likely because I'm writing stuff down, I'm talking to the guest, I'm trying to, gauge the reactions, I'm leading the conversation in certain directions, I'm monitoring audio, and just off screen here, there's a mixer that I'm mixing things down in between the conversations and all this kind of stuff. So I've got loads of stuff going on, and so I feel that affects how charismatic I can consciously put myself across to be. So where I want to start with this, Marcus, having thrown all that at you, is charisma a conscious step-by-step process that when you walk into a room you put into place? Or is it a subconscious thing that we all have, that we all get in the way of? And so that's the thing we need to break back.
Well, first of all, what a great question. I think if you're working in sales, having charisma and being able to unlock your charisma is really going to give you the edge. Now, before I answer that question, I think it's really important we define what charisma is, and my definition of what charisma is. And for a long time, if you look through history, people struggle with what is charisma. We all recognize it. It's like the taste of water. We all recognize it, but it's very difficult to explain what it is. So my definition that I work from is charisma is your ability to evoke emotions in other people whilst making them feel comfortable and safe. So we all have that ability. We all have the ability to make people feel emotions. And as we're developing a skill, and in this case, it's kind of a paradox, because the skill of developing charisma isn't about learning lots of lines, focusing on certain things. It's about unblocking yourself. So you hit the nail on the head there when, sometimes you get in the way. So it's all about just not being in the way and allowing your true essence, your true self, that really annoying bit of advice that people give you, just be yourself, allowing the true self just to shine through. Now, when we're developing a skill, or when we're developing that unblocking, we go through 4 or 5 stages, and some of your listeners may have already come across these, but the first stage is when we don't know we're rubbish at it, when we don't know we suck, and that is called unconscious incompetence. We just don't know we can't do it. So if you imagine driving a car, and you're a little kid, for example, you don't know you can't drive yet. Then we get to the next level. I remember when I took my first driving lesson, and I realized I was a bad driver. I was reversing backwards and forwards, kangarooing down the road. And that's when I had conscious incompetence. I knew now here was something I wasn't good at. Now, as we start to invest time in this area and, examine how we can allow ourselves to shine through, then we reach a stage of, when we're thinking about it, we can kind of get it right. And that's conscious competence. That's when we really have to think about it, but it all kind of clicks. So, I remember driving my car, and my driving instructor next to me, and he turned the radio on. And I'm like, how can you listen to the radio? All this stuff's going on at the same time. Because he was at the level above that, which is unconscious competence. That's when it just flows. It just clicks. Some people even get to the 5th level, which is conscious, unconscious competence. So that's when you're in that state of free flow. You're not thinking about it. But if somebody just turned the music off and said, hey, what are you doing right now? You can then break it down. And that's the level of teachers. That's the level of mastery. But just to get to that 3rd or 4th level, to go from, realizing that you're not very good, to just doing a few little things that are going to make the difference, that might make you come across slightly different, that might close that sale. Very small things sometimes can have a huge impact on your life. So to answer your question succinctly, it really is all of those. It depends where you are on that ladder. And in certain environments, you might be in a bar or you might be in a boardroom, and you find that you are just in your element there. You're comfortable. And usually when you're comfortable, you're unblocked. Now, what happens is if somebody else walks into that environment, if you're in a loud environment, for example, this may seem unusual, but my default is I'm an introvert. I actually like, reading books and being away from all the noise. But if I go into a bar environment, I'm also comfortable in that environment, but I had to learn that to become unstifled, to become unblocked. So it can be that you can be really good in one area, one location, and you move and the context is slightly different, and you've just got to build your skill up in that area as well.
Well, let's go right to the bottom and get really deep with this all of a sudden and get to the crux of the matter potentially. So if it's all about being your true self, I think the word you use then, and we've talked on the show how important it is to be your, I'm going to do air quotes here for anyone who's listened to this just on the audio side of things, but your authentic self. And I hate these cliches, but they're important, especially in the corporate world where most salespeople are, talking a bit more like this and got their corporate slideshow and it's horrible, and there's no human-to-human connection there in the conversations that you're having. What happens if your true self isn't that interesting? Is that the starting point? Do you have to become an interesting person to be charismatic, or is that irrelevant?
Well, that's, again, a great question. Here's my take on it. This realm of charisma is starting to get a bit of traction now. I've been doing this for 15 years, and it's only in the last few years that people are starting to take a bit more notice in corporate circles, because they're like, hang on a minute, there's something here. Now, there's a lot of information out there of, do X technique, do Y technique. And these are all kind of coming from this angle of putting stuff on yourself, giving yourself techniques that really aren't your true self. Now, if you're not interesting, that's okay, right? I would examine why you feel, why someone might feel that way about themselves. What's more important is that you're interested in the other person rather than trying to be interesting. Being interesting is great. It will draw people to you. It'll create a bit of an aura. But some of the most charismatic people in the world aren't loud. They're actually very quiet. They walk into a room in stillness and they turn the air to electricity. And it's not because of what they're saying. It's because of what's going on inside them. So as long as we were talking about like the cliche phrases, but as long as you enjoy being you, your relationship with you, that's the most important. If your relationship with you is, oh, I don't feel interesting, I feel a bit boring, then that is what's going to deflate you. If you absolutely love being you and you paint garden gnomes for fun, or you have a really what would be considered a dull hobby, you can still be a very interesting person. But the trick is or the focus is to put your awareness on the other person rather than worrying about what's going on inside your head.
So this is an angle that I've never really thought about before, but is someone who's charismatic then, is the skill that people want to be around you because perhaps they forget about themselves for a minute, and if they can absorb, if they can suck some value from you in that you're happy, you're confident, you're content, then there's value in it for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's different types of charisma. There's a charisma, for example, if you're walking on stage and you're presenting. But, just like when you're watching a really good TV show or a movie. I'm not going to mention Game of Thrones, but I'm kind of knee deep in that
we can talk about Game of Thrones. I'm totally into it as well. Go for it.
Here we are in the middle of season 6. When we listen back to this several years,
we should probably prerequisite this just in case there's any spoilers for people to pause and come back, perhaps.
I'm not gonna mention any spoilers, but when you watch a TV show that you really enjoy, you go to the movie or you listen to some music, you get lost in it. You become, you almost switch off. The conscious mind turns off, and then what happens is you become absorbed and you enjoy it. So if you're watching a really good sales presentation, then salespeople, we all hate being sold to, right? But when you're watching a great presentation, it doesn't feel like you're being sold to. You're just enjoying it. I think that's where Steve Jobs really excelled with his keynote speeches. And when you're chatting to somebody or you meet somebody and you're delighting in them, and I think that's the key here, you delight in that other person. You look at them and you think, what do I love about this person? What do I really love about them? And you bask in it and you enjoy it. Then what that does is it subcommunicates that, first of all, you're very comfortable in your skin, but by delighting in that other person, it allows them to relax. So a mentor of mine is a guy called Igor Ledochowski, who's an amazing hypnotist. You may have come across his work. Highly recommend it. He has the principle of go first. Set the expectation you want others to follow. So if you want your prospect to feel absolutely comfortable, it's very important that you feel absolutely comfortable. And in doing so, you subcommunicate that that's how they're going to behave as well. And most of the time, they will slip into that. There are exceptions if they've got a very strong, dominant personality, but there's ways around that as well.
Okay, let me throw this out there before we get any deeper into this, Marcus. Is charisma built up on tips, techniques, hacks, or as we've been talking about so far, is the hack to be interested in other people and these more internal things that you can't just switch on and off?
Right. Well, it's a mixture. Now, it depends what stage of your learning you're going through. If you're starting out and you haven't got, you're not really sure, you don't really have a roadmap in front of you, then it's very useful to start absorbing techniques, trying out tips, because they give you reference points. There's this whole idea of fake it till you make it. Now, I don't like that phrase because I don't think you should be fake, but if you do something that you've never tried before, and I'll give you an example of this. When I was getting my car serviced, the mechanic threw my keys at me and then leant forward and shook my hand and gave me a little wink like this, just a little cheeky wink. And I'll admit, right, it made me feel an emotion. It was like, ooh, right? And a very big secret to learn is if you want to improve what you're doing and your ability to connect with people, anytime anyone does anything around you that causes you to feel an emotion, steal it. Try it out yourself. So the mechanic, he shook my hand, gave me a wink, and I was like, oh, I feel a bit different there. So I tried that out. For the next week, every time I met somebody, I'd shake their hand, give them a little cheeky wink as well. Now, that fitted very well on my personality. It gave me a new way to express myself. But for example, that technique might not work so well on somebody else because they're not really comfortable winking at people, like, you all right? It doesn't necessarily come across in the same way. So it's very good to have this attitude of try new things out because they give you new reference points, they give you new experiences to express yourself. And if it works, Bruce Lee style, keep it. If it doesn't, don't worry about it, get rid of it. So in that sense, everyone around you is a wonderful teacher. As you progress, as you go further on this journey. And, I started out as someone who's very quiet, very shy. As I said, I was an introvert. And I didn't have a huge circle of friends. I wasn't the life and soul of the party. As I learned, I put techniques into practice. I tried it out. I put in the hours and found out what worked and what didn't. But now coming full circle, I realized that at some point it becomes just principles. Those principles are things that really, the little differences that make the big differences. And the biggest secret of all is your relationship with yourself. Now, if you're selling charisma, the majority of the audience may not want to go on that journey yet. They may just want to have a bite-sized chunk. Okay, give me one technique that I can use to, change the relationship with somebody. And so it's based on your own progress and your own goals. So yeah, ultimately, it does come down to your relationship with yourself. But most of what's being taught out there is technique.
So for anyone listening who's perhaps slightly skeptical at the moment, and of course they shouldn't be, and I'm totally bought into all of this, what would be one of those bite-sized chunks that they could try, which would then turn things around and put things into perspective for them?
Write me a check for £50,000. No, okay. So one of the techniques you can use, in fact, it's a principle, is imagine when you go and pick somebody up from the airport, like a family member or something like that, and you see people waiting outside the arrivals gate. You get the people holding the taxi signs there, but you also get the family members. Sometimes they've got flowers and whatnot. And their relative or their long-lost relative, whoever it is, comes through the gate and you see their faces light up and they throw their arms around each other. And they're like, they have that embrace and they're happy. And then they kind of take a breather. And then whoever it is picks up the luggage and they walk to the car and then they're out of there. Now, that's a very elegant description of beautiful, charismatic connections forming. Here's what I mean. When most people have very boring, logical conversations. We do that because when we're growing up, when we're, I don't know, 9 or 10, we're playful, we're having lots of fun. And then as we get older, we're trying to fit in and we doubt ourselves a lot. We stop taking risks and we start being on our best behavior and get really boring. And then sometimes if we're very lucky, we realize we're being boring and we break out of it. Now, when you meet somebody for the first time, let's say you're buying, what's your favorite coffee shop or tea shop that you go to?
There's a Starbucks around the corner, so.
Starbucks is a classic, right? Yeah. So you walk into a Starbucks, you can just order your coffee in a normal way. Hi, can I have a coffee, please? Great. And let's say you go for a little bit of extra conversation. How's your day today? Good. How's your day? Yeah, good. And it's really mundane. You're on your best behavior. That kind of speech, that kind of exchange is called phatic speech. It's the kind of dialogue that we share with one another just to make sure that we're both alive. Now, phatic speech changes all the way around the world. If I say, for example, in America, I greet somebody in the English way, "You all right?" They may respond, depending on what part of America it is, "Yeah, I am okay. I'm fine. Why? What's up?" But if we say that in a certain part of England, "You all right?" is a greeting. Likewise, in America, if we say like, "How you doing?" It's like, "Yeah, good." And you ask that back. In certain parts of England, "How you doing?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Why? What's up?" So these little signals that we send out to each other, phatic speech, is empty conversation. It's just to make sure we're both part of the same tribe. Now, going back to Starbucks, we exist in a place where we're always exchanging phatic speech. It gets really boring. If you can stir that up a bit, if you can spike the emotions that you experience with somebody, you'll set yourself different. You'll set yourself apart from every other person in the room. You'll make yourself completely different. So if you walk up, for example, and you say, "Hey, just so you know, this is a robbery. I'm going to steal all the coffee here today." You will have a different kind of conversation. You will build tension up in the conversation to begin with because you say, "Hey, this is a robbery. I'm going to steal all the coffee." Or you might do something completely different. You might say, "You, congratulations, you get to serve me today. Hooray." That, again, will cause that emotional spike. Now, in the airport, let's go back to that example. Natural conversations, when you see your friends, you throw your arms around them, you shake their hands, whatever. If you do it too much, it gets really annoying. You imagine, I'd love to see this scene. You come at the airport and they're just hugging each other and like, "Hey, how you doing? Great. Oh, so good to see you." And you go, "Yeah, I'm great." And the conversation kind of just gets labored very quickly. Or if they see each other and they're just like, "Hi, yeah, hi." It's like those people have got problems in their relationship because there's no emotion being expressed. So the secret is make the other person just feel a little bit of emotion and then let it go. And you do that by taking risks. You do that by going first.
Where is the line here between, because the Starbucks side of things, I totally get, that is what I'm good at. I'm good at just making people smile, then, transferring that into a conversation and just keeping going. Clearly, this is what I do all day on the podcast, essentially, a 5-10 minute chat, get to know the guest very slightly, and then obviously build that relationship throughout the show itself. So I'm reasonably good at that. Where is the line then between, and the way you described it, I would say if I was to describe someone who was doing that, I perhaps wouldn't use the word charismatic. I might say that they're a bit cheeky or fun, and from that very small example. Where's the line between that and the person who walks into the room who's just incredibly, they walk in the room and everyone turns around and looks at them. There's then this weird moment where everyone's going, I just want to go and talk to that dude or that lady. And then whether you do or not, maybe you forget about it for the rest of the night. But there's that gripping moment there. And to add just slightly more context to this, at the last company I worked at, there was a guy there. He'd been in the company for, say, 30 years. It was a medical device company. He knew all the surgeons from when they were like 18, going through university to become doctors, and then through all the surgical training. And they all loved him like he's a big uncle. And he was a salesperson, but he'd gone that extra level to build rapport with them, and he knew all about the families and all that kind of thing. But there was something special about him, and I could never suss this out. And it goes beyond that kind of being able to strike up a conversation and make people smile. And it was a magnetism, and that's how I've always seen charisma as this guy. Since then, is it just the cheeky, the making people smile? Is it just that stacked on top of loads of other things that creates that end product after 30 years of working on all this?
Right. So from my experience, well, if we look at that example, that was just one thing to go out and play with. So that's just one little building block. There's other building blocks as well. Now, it's beautiful, when you unblock yourself and you flow. That is what I think is when you achieve the level of mastery, it's an art form. So certain areas you can focus on in unlocking. Certain areas you can focus your attention on and thinking, right, I'm going to spend time, for example, developing my ability to make people feel emotions. So that's part of it, but that's not all of it. Another thing might be, right, I'm going to focus on my appearance. What am I wearing? Because that's going to create impact. Another thing might be, right, I'm going to focus on how I raise and lower my status around people. And that's going to be another thing. So from my perspective, it's about ticking as many of those boxes as you can. And you can either do it all in one go by completely unblocking yourself, liberating yourself and just being free. Or you can just be very logical in your approach, which is also great. And that's when you just be very systematic and you go through and you think, right, well, you know what? I am very chatty. I've got great conversation, but where am I lacking a bit here? Maybe I need to buy a good pair of shoes. Or maybe, I'm walking into the room. People aren't noticing me right now. Well, how many of the people in the room do I already know? And if you know nobody, well, perhaps it will be that you create a magic moment with somebody. You walk up to somebody, you have a conversation with them, they start laughing, and other people slowly start to notice. It could be, there's this presence when you walk in, and people take note as well. Well, what is your presence like? So that's another thing to focus on.
I just want to interrupt you there, Marcus, because you said something about status then, and I'm conscious of time here, but I think that's definitely worth going over because there'll be a lot of salespeople listening, and I've been in a situation where I'm dealing with surgeons. So at the age of 23, I'm dealing with a 55-year-old, big, there's a guy local that I still speak to now, but he's a big gorilla, alpha male, one of the best colorectal surgeons in Europe, and I got on really well with him. But I had this weird back and forth over status with him, and it was only after speaking to him about it that he said, essentially, you need to just forget about it and just be yourself, and that's how he likes you to be. So it's coming into this unblocking territory that we've been talking about so far. So first off, is status, do you have to be at the same status of someone else if they're perhaps seen socially as a higher status person than you to have a charismatic conversation with them, or is that not what this is about?
Well, a fantastic question. And, before I go into that, the guy who's giving you the advice there, he's coming from a place probably of unconscious competence. So he's like, oh yeah, just be yourself, just relax. Because yeah, he's right. That is the answer. You do want to get to that place where you're not thinking about the status transactions you're having. If you're still 5 years from now, if you're still thinking about status transactions, then you screwed up, right? You want to get to that point where it just becomes natural. Now, let's look at the definition of status, and this is important. Many people get the idea of social status and social value mixed up. Now, what I mean by that is, let's take who's a famous celebrity let's take Tom Cruise, right? So Tom Cruise is a famous celebrity. He's been in lots of A-list movies. He is somebody who's got high social value. In other words, he can exhibit his strength very easily, his power. But he's also high status. He walks with his head held up high. He walks confidently. Now let's take another celebrity who's got high social value. Let's take Woody Allen. High social value. Woody Allen is what I would consider low status, but high social value. So he it's part of his act as well. But he'll his shoulders are bent over. He'll be humble. He'll be meek as an extreme. They're both potentially very charismatic and potentially very powerful in the social sphere. So status is really the way you're choosing to communicate with somebody else. High status individuals usually have their head up high and their body language is open. Low status, your head is down low and your body language is closed. I look like one of those hair commercials if you're watching the video. This is before. Anyway, so that's the first thing to determine. Now,
let me just clarify that. So social status in regards to charisma is less important than social value.
Okay, so social value is really important. Social value is you focusing on you and making people feel wonderful. Yeah. Social status is the way you do it.
Okay.
I'll give you an example of this, right? So when you were at school, did you ever have a teacher who, when they walked into the room, you would just be like on your best behavior? You'd be a bit scared almost.
Yeah, Dr. Knight, his name was.
Dr. Knight. Oh God, that sounds cool, doesn't it? Dr. Knight. So yeah, I had a teacher like that as well. He was the history teacher, Mr. Smith. You walk in, you just don't take in the lesson, right? And you don't want to make a mistake in front of that person because they're stern. Did you ever have a teacher who had no control of the class?
Pretty much all the rest of them, yeah.
Right. When I turn my back, don't throw anything. Now, please promise. Right. That teacher was the one who had no control of the class, is lower status than the class. The class realize they have more dominance over the lower status teacher, where the first teacher is higher status. Now, here's this question not everyone can have a reference point to, but did you ever have a teacher who everybody loved, everybody respected, and yet they behaved, but they were almost like they achieved that where they were almost best friends, but they still behaved well as well?
Yeah, for sure. We had Mr. Noble, who at the time everyone played this game called Counter-Strike. He used to play it as well, and he was a beast at it. And so everyone respected the fact that he was everyone thought that he was one of us. Yeah. But in reality, clearly he was leveraging it as a tool, perhaps, to and talking about it purposefully. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was unconsciously conscious of that had the effect on the group. So yeah, we would all listen to him because we thought that he was one of us rather than kind of domineering over us.
Right. Okay. Well, that teacher had the same magical quality. I had a teacher called Mr. Wilson. And Mr. Wilson he had this magic balance where he could be high status when he wanted to lead. He could be low status when he was showing empathy and wanted to listen. Now, what that looked like is I remember walking into class late, and the first thing he did, high status. He's like, I can't believe you're late. Finger pointing. This is high status. Oh, what are you? You're supposed to be on time. And then, I'm like, oh God, I'm in trouble. And then he'd do the, oh, I don't want to be mad at you. I don't want to be angry. And I'd be like, oh God, I've upset him. Oh. And so he had this balance. He could lower his status. He could, you'll see when you're flying on a plane, hopefully not if you're the pilot, because you're supposed to be at the front, right? But when you're on a plane and the stewardess or the steward comes and they ask you for your, what you're going to have to, what you're ordering off the menu, they will get down to your level. They will crouch down. They will lower their status. And what it does is it creates that comfort in you. But for example, if the steward's like, right, everyone's got to put on their life jackets really quick, he's not going to be getting down like, oh, would you all put your life jackets on? He'd be dominant, right? So using that, realizing that those status transactions are there, what you can do is you can build influence with people. So if I want to lead people, I'll be high status. If I want to listen to them, I'll lower my status. I'm not attached to being either high or low status. Yet in a lot of self-improvement books and a lot of training, it's like, oh, high status is better than low status. No, status is just status. It's the secret is being both statuses as you need. This guy, for example, the high status guy, sure, be low status when you're listening to him. But maybe see if you can get him to jump through your hoops a bit. Maybe say, oh, can you just grab us that pen, please? See if he does.
Well, that's precisely how it ended up. And it's really intriguing that you pulled that out of it. He used to run rings around everyone and all the other reps, and the rep that was on previous to what I was doing on the territory, and it would be, 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon. I need you to come in. I need you to bring this endoscope in, and we're going to do this procedure. I just said to him, I'm not doing anything on a Saturday. If you want it, I'll come over on a Friday. And there was a compromise there. And I guess what you're alluding to here is it's the dynamic of it that you are then, I hate to use words like this, but you're kind of in like vibration and you're bouncing back and forth. And so that deepens things and builds the rapport there.
Yeah, that's it. It's, first of all, I love that doing that. When you're in a situation at work where somebody has the same level of clout as you, but they order you around. If you've ever had that situation, what you can do is put conditions. So for example, if somebody says, right, I need you to do all those reports. If you say yes, you're at their whim. But if you say no, then you're not a team player. What you do is you put a condition on it. I say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do that if you do XYZ report. Now, if they say they won't, then guess what? You can turn around quite happily and say, well, I'm not going to do this either. But if they say yeah, then that's fine, because you make sure that your condition serves you better than the task you're doing for them.
Yeah, for sure. And just on that point, this works with customers as well. So you don't want to be just to be a pushover with the people that you're working with, because then, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but they don't value you as much as a partner, as you alluded to then, Marcus, of you as a salesperson. You want to be the consultant. You want them to value your opinions, and when you question them and give advice, you want them to take it on board. If everything you come out with, they go, it's rubbish, that's nonsense, then you're not in that dynamic where they're paying attention to you and giving you value. So all this is brilliant. It's painting a far clearer picture in my mind, rather than you just want to be the alpha male in the room and then people will buy from you because you're leading them. There's got to be a bit of push and pull with all of this.
Got to be a dance.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Thanks. There's, that's one of the, when I look at charisma as a whole, I have basically 7 pillars, 7 areas to focus on. And one of them is rhetoric, or your ability to use your words to create those dynamics, to change the dynamic of the conversation, and in ways you've just described. And I think that's a great aspect of using charisma, using it to influence people. And sometimes it's not about just being that, that alpha guy walking on his knuckles. Sometimes it can be very slight things that you do. And that's where the majesty of it comes in. So that's what I enjoy.
Fantastic stuff. Well, Marcus, I want you to tell us a little bit about the masterclass that you've got going on in a minute, but I've got a couple of questions that I ask everyone that comes on the show. Sure. The first one, and I know you're not a quote-unquote sales professional, I know you're not working in B2B sales, but you'll have insights on all of these, I'm sure. First question, who is the world's greatest salesperson?
Children. Kids. You can learn everything from kids. Kids, they're not affected by social stigmas. They're not affected by how they should behave. they're just free flowing. A happy child, like, can sell you anything, right? So that they are the best teachers, little kids, right? They're unblocked. So I would look to them. What are they doing? What are they doing when they're happy? Why are they happy? Your ability to be happy is what makes other people happy. And if you find somebody who makes you happy in your life, you want to spend more time with them and pay them money. So.
Okay, next one. Other than your own, what's one book or resource that you'd recommend to the Salesman Podcast audience?
Right, that's a good question. As a general book to get started on, I would say How to Win Friends and Influence People is a bit of a classic. I know, some of you listening would have already read that. If you have already read that and you want to find something a bit extra, apart from my book, I would recommend you check out the book Impro for the Theatre by Keith Johnston. That's a fantastic book. It's written for actors to develop their ability on stage to be more authentic, but there's a lot in that book that's very useful for what you'll be doing when you're selling to people as well. So it's a book that you would pick up and approach it thinking, right, what can this teach me?
Interesting. I'll check that out myself. It's a new one on me. We'll include that in the show notes or at salesman.red. And last question, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
Really look after your hair because it'll start to fall out. Oh, no, wait. Advice for sales. Don't take it all too seriously. Make every sales call you have more enjoyable for you than the other person. All right. Always be having fun. Always be focusing on the fun. All right. Life is, no one gets out alive at the end of the day. So enjoy your time here. You don't want to be stuck doing something you don't love. So really focus on how can I leave the person in front of me better off than what I found them. Whether I sell to them or not, what can I do to leave them slightly better off or massively better off? If you do that, you will be gold. You'll be platinum, actually. So there we go.
That is the most unique answer I think we've ever had to that question. I really appreciate that. And it puts a different spin on, usually it's add value, do this, yada, yada, all these cliches of sales, and they usually revolve around this concept of adding value. But as you talked about then, even if the other person on the other end of the phone wants to tell you to piss off, but they've got a smile on their face, they're going to remember you as the charismatic salesperson that rang up, and then when you ring them up again 6 weeks later with something else to follow up with, or you speak to one of their colleagues, you've left a nice taste with them. In that, there's so many, and I'm getting caught up in this because it's something I'm really passionate about. In that everyone takes corporate sales and B2B sales way too seriously, from the salesperson, because they're constantly getting hounded by their sales managers who are getting hounded by sales directors. And then, of course, it goes all the way up to the people in charge who are working quarter to quarter because the shareholders aren't happy because of this, and this. And, of course, people's lives are kind of wrapped up in it a little bit in that obviously you want to make a living from it. But I really like that spin you put on it, and I really appreciate the answer to that question because you're spot on. Nothing really matters that much at work. It's never life or death. And if it is, you're probably in the wrong job, right?
Right, exactly. And you know what? Apply that to all your life. It doesn't have to be the person you're selling to. It can be the person on the street as you walk out your house. You say, yeah, you look great today. Just add a little bit of shine to that light, add a bit of sparkle. You'll feel great in doing it yourself anyway. So it's kind of win-win.
Brilliant. Marcus, tell us a little bit about your Conversation Masterclass and then the book which we can get access to on your homepage as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, I run a Conversation Masterclass in London. That's a training where we take you out into real life environments to improve your conversation skills, your charisma, how you're coming across. So we look at your conversational choices as you speak to real people. We find out what you're doing great, where your body language can be tightened up a bit, how you're moving through the conversations, what you're doing there, because there's classic mistakes that everyone makes. And my team of trainers and I have traveled the world for the last decade and a half doing this and training our clients up. So we run that workshop. It's in London. It's well worth jumping on a plane and coming out here. I'll work with you personally, and my team will, and you'll leave with your skills significantly upgraded.
Amazing.
Thank you. And the book as well. And if you think, well, hang on a minute, I don't know if I want to come on a Conversation Masterclass. Well, good, you're not allowed. But if you do want to find out a bit more, I've written a book that you can get from my website. And guess what? It's free. You don't even have to pay for it. How good is that? So if you go over to yourcharismacoach.com, that's where the book is. Enter your email details. Yeah, that's the catch. And I'll send you the book. It's a great book. It will change what you're doing. Even if it improves what you're doing by 5%, how much is that going to be worth to you? So the training is there under if you look for products or training, and the book is there on the landing page.
Fantastic. We will link to both of them in the show notes for anyone who is at the gym or on a treadmill or riding a bike at the moment, trying to scribble things down on the back of the hand as they're listening to this. And Marcus, I genuinely appreciate our conversation today, mate. You are more welcome to come back on in the not too distant future and to dive into some of this a bit deeper, because I feel like we've only scratched the surface, and I genuinely think that there's a lot of value for the audience here, both in business and just in life in general, from both the perspective of perhaps getting more things done, being able to have better conversations and communicating better with the friends, family, and colleagues. But then, as all this came back to the end of the show, the fact that if it can make you happier and more interesting internally, then there's huge value there. So I appreciate that, Marcus. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I look forward to the next time. Cheers, Will.
And there we have it, Marcus. Thank you for joining me on the show. I appreciate it. I appreciate your insights. Some really good ones in there that I'd never heard of, literally never heard of before from a charisma standpoint. And so I appreciate that. I want to thank you, Sales Nation, as always, for tuning in. I massively appreciate your time. And I appreciate all the feedback and sharing that you guys do as well. It means a lot to me. It helps the show grow. And the bigger we get, the bigger and better guests we can get on. So I appreciate that. And with all that said, I'll speak with you all again tomorrow.